Hello, Year 4, and a very happy World Book Day to you all. I'm sure you're going to have lots of fun today with all the activities that are going online for you. So really get involved. And I thought, obviously, as it's World Book Day, I should probably come online and read part of our book. A few people have been asking me, will we get it finished? I'm not sure we will, but we've got quite a bit to go. But what I'll do, even though you're back, I'll still record onto Seesaw so that 4J and 4Y you can still see what's going on as well. Okay, recap. Oh, he's found Una, hasn't he? Or Una's found him. So yeah, he'll be pleased that he's back with Una. Right, chapter 8, Burning Bright. Once down off the rock, I set the three little orangutans down on the ground. With Una there, towering over them, they were reluctant to leave me at first, but then Charlie seemed to recognise the dark-haired orangutan as one of her own. She needed no encouragement after that. Giving a wide berth to Una, she scampered over to what must have seemed to her at long last to be a proper-looking mother. Tonk and Bart followed, and soon the mother orangutan was being besieged by all three. She looked a little overwhelmed as they clambered all over her, but perfectly happy. I noticed, though, that it was with Charlie that she was at her most attentive, her most affectionate. Una's trunk was the only part of her I could hug. I'd done it often enough before. I waited for the deep rumble of contentment that I remembered so well, and when, sure enough, it came, vibrating all through her, and all through me too. It was so good to feel that wrinkled roughness again, to trace once again the patterns of her pinkish markings in her skin, to look up at her all-seeing eyes, to be wafted again by her great ears. She was still dusty from some recent mud bath, and a bit smelly too, but it was an old familiar smell that I found as reassuring as the rest of her. She was turning then, kneeling for me, her trunk curling around and lifting me up onto her neck. I was back where I loved to be, where I belonged. I caught a glimpse of Other One too, sitting high above us in amongst the leaves, looking down on us all, satisfaction written all over his face, as if he had engineered this whole thing, as if somehow he had brought us all together. I believed at that moment that he had, and I still believe it now. "Thank you, Other One," I cried. "Thank you, Una." I was whooping and punching the air then, the sheer joy of the moment surging through me. "You see, Charlie, Bart, Tonk, I told you Una would come looking for us. I knew she'd find us, I knew it." But the little orangutans were far too busy with their new-found mother to be listening to me at all. They were all over her, and all over each other too, squealing with excitement, jockeying for the best place to get the most attention. She was sharing it out as well as she could, but the longer I watched the more it became clear to me that little Charlie might well be her very own baby, that she was without any question her favourite one. She was the only one that was allowed to try to suckle, her little fists clenched tight in her mother's straggly brown hair. Bart and Tonk were not rejected as such, not pushed away. They were allowed to cling on, but not to interfere with Charlie. As I looked on, I felt overwhelmed with a huge sense of relief. Not only was I safely back with Una, but the three little orangutans I had looked after all this time had survived their ordeal and were at last reunited with one of their own kind. I noticed then for the first time that there was a livid red scar across the mother orangutan's forehead, and that she often held her left arm across her chest, supporting it as if she could with her other hand, as if she was nursing a damaged shoulder. I was sure of it then. This had to be the mother I'd seen falling out of the fig tree that day, the one that had been lying there, dead as I had thought, with her baby still clutching her. And Charlie was that baby. A bullet must have grazed the mother's forehead. She'd fallen out of the fig tree and had lain there unconscious on the ground, while the hunters grabbed Charlie and carried her off. I knew well enough by now just how tight Charlie would have clung to her, how he must have had to tear her off her mother. The whole picture of this brutality of the massacre flashed through my mind then, enraging me all over again. But not even that could take away how privileged I felt at that moment to be there to witness the tenderness of their reunion. There was enough fruit and water to be found for us all to be able to stay where we were by the rock for the rest of the day. Other one hung around, literally sometimes, and watched from afar as the little orangutans gambolled about, swinging amongst the trees, ambushing one another. I had never seen them so relaxed or so happy. Sitting alone upon the rock with Una busy at her feeding and the orangutans at play, I've got to admit that for a while I was beginning to feel ignored, abandoned even. It was as if they'd forgotten about me. So when I saw the mother climbing up on the rock towards me and bringing the little ones with her, I felt very grateful to her. She came to sit nearby, watching me, considering me. I sensed caution in her gaze, but approval too, almost as if the little ones had told her everything that had happened, about all we had been through together, which I knew was absurd, but I thought it anyway. And when after some time she reached out and touched my hand, I felt sure that there was real affection in the gesture, and maybe even gratitude. That evening the mother orangutan climbed high into a tree to make her sleeping nest, carrying all three of them. She went a great deal higher than I had ever managed. Again, I have to say, I did feel excluded, which was ridiculous, I know, but it was why I left my rock and went to lie down on the forest floor with Una, in the crook of her leg, braving the damp and creepy crawlies. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be close to her that night. I was missing my little family and the intimacy of the sleeping nest. But I had forgotten what good company Una was, and what a good listener she was too. Never for one moment could I forget she was there. She was right beside me, the whole wonderful, wrinkly, smelly, leathery bulk of her. I think I must have told her everything that night, all about Mr. Anthony and Kaya and our escape from the cage, about the hunters and their dogs who came after us. She kept touching me from time to time with the tip of her trunk, to reassure me perhaps, or maybe to reassure both of us, herself as well, that this had really happened, that we were together again, and not dreaming it. As I told her my story, leaning back against her side, hands behind my head, I could hear her stomach churning and gurgling and groaning. As I expected, of course, the familiar elephant melody would be accompanied by a formidable elephant fart whenever she felt like it, which was quite often. This was one of many reasons why I think I must have gone to sleep that night with a laugh in my heart and a big, big smile on my face. Excuse me. I was nudged awake next morning by Una's trunk. She wanted me to get up. The first thing I noticed was that the jungle was filled with mist. Everything was lost in it, except Una and the looming shadow of the rock and the forest floor. Una seemed unsettled, troubled by something, tossing her head. She wanted to be on her way, and she was in a hurry too. It was then that I began to realize that there was something wrong about the mist, something strange and unnatural. It didn't drift in among the high canopy of the jungle as I'd seen it often before. Instead it hung low, everywhere, clinging to the trees. It was swirling about us, snaking its way through the forest. And it wasn't white, but almost yellow. It smelt different too. Now I knew what it was. It wasn't mist at all. It was smoke, drifting smoke. The jungle was on fire. The jungle was burning. As I listened, I could hear above me and around me that all the invisible creatures of the forest were on the move, whooping, cackling, cawing, screeching. They were fleeing for their lives. I could only hope that in amongst them somewhere were the mother orangutan and their three little ones, and other one. I felt Una's trunk come around me, pulling me in. She was urging me to mount. I needed a little encouragement. I climbed up to her neck, and she was on the move at once, striding out, almost on the run already. She lifted her trunk and trumpeted. Then she was charging through the trees in full flight. Because everything had happened so fast, I hadn't been able to collect my thoughts. It was a while before I could, and when I did, everything became horribly clear. I remembered then what Mr. Anthony had told me, every chilling word. I burn them down, I make a ruddy great bonfire of the forest. We were careering through the trees now. It was all I could do not to fall off. It was a while since I'd ridden Una, and not since the day of the tsunami had she ever stampeded quite like this. It took me some time to find my balance again, my riding seat, but I rediscovered my old technique quickly enough. I gripped with my legs, dug my heels into her neck, and managed to ride the pitch and toss, clutching desperately on to any folds of skin that my fingers could cling onto. But however fast Una was running from it, The smoke always seemed to be there, all around us. In patches it was so dense now that I was forced to hold my breath until we were out of it, and that was terrifying, because once in the middle of the suffocating whiteout like this, I would wonder if we'd ever come out into the clearer air beyond, whether I'd ever be able to take a breath again. In the end, with less and less good air to breathe, I had to breathe in whatever there was, knowing even as I was doing it that I had to be taking in as much smoke as I was taking in air. I forced myself to make believe I was underwater, not to breathe at all, but of course I had to. So then I could only try not to breathe in deep, not to gasp, but I couldn't help myself. All I could do then was to try to control the coughing that was racking my whole body. But the harder I tried to stop myself from coughing, the more I began to choke, and the giddier I was becoming. My whole head was filled with smoke. I had my mouth closed, but somehow it seemed to be finding its way in through my eyes, through my ears. I felt myself fainting, and for a few moments I tried to resist giving into it, but there was nothing I could do about it. I fell heavily onto the forest floor. I remember that, and I lay there for a few moments, gasping for breath. But on the ground I found at least there was some proper air to breathe. I looked up and saw that Una was coming back for me. Then she was trying to lift me, to get me to sit up. With better air to breathe, at last I recovered quickly. I had coughed and spluttered the smoke out of my lungs. I was thinking I was feeling just about strong enough now to climb back up to Una, when I felt myself being taken very firmly by the hand. I turned to see the mother orangutan standing beside me, up on her 2 legs now, the 3 little ones clinging to her. The strength in her grip was so powerful that, liked or not, I had to get to my feet and go with her, go wherever she wanted to take me, do whatever she wanted me to do. Her eyes were pleading with me, trying to make me understand. I knew she was telling me something. One look at her arm was enough to know what it was. From the way she was holding it, I could tell it must be hurting dreadfully. It was obvious to me then that she could not cope on her own any longer with all 3 of them, that she needed my help, that she was asking for it. When I reached out a hand, there was barely a moment's hesitation before Bart grabbed it and swung himself up onto my shoulders, where he grasped my hair with his fists and hung on painfully. Tonk followed suit, without even being prompted, and nestled himself contentedly in the crook of my arm. Seemingly satisfied now, the mother orangutan released my hand and set off along the trail ahead of us, walking 3-legged, with Charlie's arm wrapped around her, and looking back all of the while, over her mother's shoulder, at me. I was unsure at first whether I should follow her or not, but when the orangutan stopped and looked behind, I was left in no doubt that she was waiting for us, that she meant us to follow her, and that she knew exactly where she was going. I had the distinct impression that she was taking charge. Una seemed to sense it too, for she began to move along the trail following the orangutan, and without stopping to offer me a ride either. I was a little disappointed at that, until I thought about it. I'd forgotten just how intelligent Una was, how wise. It took me a while, but I soon understood that she must have known I was far better off where I was, down on the forest floor, out of the worst of the smoke. Progress was slow now. We were having to travel at a leisurely pace of the mother orangutan, and in places where the trail was overgrown, or where it was disappearing altogether, we were having to make our way through the dense undergrowth. But at least as we went, the air was becoming easier to breathe for all of us. Little Charlie was still suffering a bit. I could hear her struggling for breath sometimes, wheezing and coughing. We kept moving all through the heavy heat of the day. Then, towards evening, a sudden breeze blew up, clearing the smoke away at last. When it came on to rain, when lightning crashed and thunder rolled and rattled over the jungle, it didn't bother me in the slightest. Bart and Tonk were hating every moment of it, burrowing their heads into whatever crannies they could find, an armpit or a neck, but I knew if this storm could only last long enough, then it would put out any fire Mr. Anthony had started. With the smoke gone, and weary of walking now, I begged a ride upon Una. I had Bart and Tonk still attached, but as we rode both of them seemed surprisingly unfazed either by Una or by their novel mode of transport. Ahead of us, the mother orangutan plodded on with Charlie, showing no sign of slowing or stopping, even though the light was beginning to fail. There was an intrepid determination about her gait. Uphill, downhill, she just kept on going. I could see that she knew where she was going to. She wasn't just wandering aimlessly through the jungle. There could be no doubt about it. This was a trail that she knew well. She was our pathfinder, She was showing us the way. We could stop when she was good and ready to stop, and certainly not before. But then, high above us, I heard and saw the other one was still with us. He wasn't shadowing us though. He wasn't simply accompanying us. He was going on ahead, swinging through the trees, in front of Mother Orangutan. It was he that was leading us on our way, not her. I'd got it wrong. She was following him, and we were following both of them. More and more I was coming to think of our other one as our guardian orangutan, our guardian angel, that maybe he had been all along from the start. It was nearly dark when we emerged at last out of the forest into the different world, a different world that seemed to me, and a lighter world too. We were being led along a narrow track that wound steeply upwards, a sheer cliff face to one side of us. The track was only just wide enough for Una. She trod gingerly, as sure-footed and as carefree as ever, and I was thankful for that, because I could see that there was a drop seemed to go on and on. I was mightily relieved when it was what it was she had discovered there. I thought it must be minerals or salt in the rock maybe. It kept her busy and happy too. I could tell she was enjoying it from the endless rumblings of satisfaction that echoed through the cave all night long. And we're going to hold it there. Okay, so there's your story for World Book Day. Enjoy the rest of the activities and your work that you do. More days to seats in just a few days. Okay, enjoy your day. Take care. Bye bye.